Hi, this is Bruce Bolger. I'm a founder of the Enterprise Engagement Alliance and a key instructor for this class for CFOs on the whole concept of human capital management and employee engagement. I'm very pleased to share this session today with Todd Hanson. He's president of Catalyst Performance Group, which is a leading company in the area of business operating systems and ROI of engagement. So we'll be hearing from him in the second half on a specific system that you can use to analyze the ROI of almost any type of human resources, and in fact, many sales and marketing processes that your management team will come up with that in the past you've not been able to measure in an adequate way. So we're going to let Todd sign off now while I take off the first half. And Todd, we look forward to seeing you back here in about 20 minutes or so. Thanks a
Awesome.
lot, Todd. So let's get started with human capital management, metrics, and return on investment measures. And in this class, we're going to talk a little bit more about this new emerging field of human capital management. Why is it taking off now? I'm going to talk about the new U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission disclosure regulations, the World Economic Forum stakeholder capitalism metrics, ISO 30414 human capital reporting and other metrics, the master measurement model, which is one way of measuring the ROI of engagement processes. And then Todd, he's going to take us through the process for measuring the ROI of almost anything HR and marketing want to throw at you to take precious company money. Because the sad fact is that most companies do not measure the ROI of almost any of their business practices when it comes to people. So let's talk now about this whole emerging area of human capital report. This was fostered not only by analytics and technology that enable us to measure now in ways never before possible, as you'll see in this session, the impact of human capital on our financial results. But what really pushed this along is the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission recently passed a regulation in its SK regulations disclosure update, now effective, that was November 9th, 2020, that requires all publicly held companies registered in the U.S. to disclose to the extent considered material to their business, their human capital reporting and management practices. Now, many people complain that these are very, very wide open and that they don't require much specificity. And in fact, the early reports that have come through are very vague in many cases. But we believe that this is going to lead to a tremendous amount of competition as investors and other stakeholders begin to look at these reports and start asking serious questions at management meetings. Because as you've heard in earlier classes, environmental, social, governance investing, that's called ESG, and the whole focus on people in business has really taken hold even before the pandemic, but quite accelerated by it. So now companies are advised to report on their methods used to recruit, develop, and retain employees in a way that is comparable from year to year. And the World Economic Forum, and that's, of course, a very well-known organization. They throw that big Davos event every year. I guess this year will be virtually. But anyway, they have just released stakeholder capitalism metrics, that's what they call it, that have 21 environmental, social, and government guidelines that include clear human capital metrics. And these have been agreed upon by 120 major companies. And in Europe now, all companies with more than 500 employees generally must report on their human capital practices as well. And as I said, investors in the fast-growing ESG and governance sector are eager for companies to report on their human capital metrics because investors now believe, and so does the Securities and Exchange Commission of the US, that human capital management practices are material to organizational results. Material, that means it has a fiduciary impact. So boards and CEOs can no longer ignore the people issues of their business. And this does not just apply to publicly held companies. Brian Moynihan, the CEO and chairman of Bank of America, has said recently that this will apply to every big company. When big companies focus on something like human capital, it trickles down, and all companies will be focusing on it because, again, people are material to success. In fact, Moynihan even went so far as to say that in a few years, companies, how much they pay for their loans could be based on the degree of human capital disclosures they provide, because as Moynihan said, up to 95% of bankruptcies can be attributed to poor people management. So, another catalyst for this idea of having formal standards was helped along by ISO. Many people know the Organization for International or the International Organization for Standardization. It's called ISO because that means Greek. In Greek, that means same. Anyway, they founded, or I should say, they launched ISO 30414, human capital reporting standards, which, while not yet being applied by many companies, has generated a fair amount of interest in the idea of having a standardized way to actually calculate different types of measures so that you can compare them from company to company. And I'm going to be talking a little bit later in this course about a bunch of other organizations that are all trying to do the same thing and how that's going to shake out. Whether any one standard will become universal, personally, I don't think so, at least not in my lifetime. I'm not even sure that's necessary. What's most important is that organizations use calculations that are transparent and that are comparable, and there are any number of excellent types of standards out there that can be utilized. But the key is this is the whole idea of disclosures is not to report on information. It's in fact to have good dashboards against which to manage your business. And in this course, we're going to be talking about this whole idea of how you can actually correlate your human capital dashboard, the key measures that you use to manage your people business. You can actually measure the potential ROI and the results in a way that most companies don't know about, and which is why, of course, most companies do not. But in fact, if you have a strategic and systematic approach to fostering the engagement, active engagement of people, the active involvement of people, you can increase your productivity and the ROI of the methodology you use to engage people by a significant measure. Having a clear human capital dashboards drives better results by aligning human activities to organizational goals. For instance, many companies have recognition programs that reward length of service, and they spend, in some cases, large amounts of money on them, when in fact, many employees never even hit those thresholds, and they're certainly not motivated to hit those thresholds by getting a prize. So more and more companies are shifting those types of reward systems to align with their bigger goals of retention, willingness to refer, emotional connection, and focusing on the actions, which, if done more of, will yield the desired organizational results. And these types of practices can lower employment and customer risks, reduce litigation, make sure you're rewarding the right type of management, and then automatically provide the data that many companies will need, many public companies or large companies will need to disclose to the regulatory bodies or to their investors or to all of their stakeholders in the form of corporate responsibility reports. And those are voluntary reports that more and more companies are publishing about their ESG, environmental social governance practices, to help them alleviate concerns, or I should even say motivate stakeholders about their commitment to people and sustainable business practices. There are right now a number of human capital standards. Many of them focus on outputs. That is, like the great places to work. You're being surveyed, and a company says, an outside auditor says that you're a great place to work. J.D. Powers, you're familiar with that. But then there are more granular standards like the ISO 30414 standards, which I'll go into in a little bit more in depth, so you get an idea of what these metrics mean and how we can run our businesses better using them. But groups like the American Accountability and Standards Board are really getting involved on an international basis, and they're linking up with the International Accounting Standards Board to develop formal standards that actually can be used in accounting practices. The Embankment Project, which is an international group run by EY and other organizations, they are developing their own standards. And then the World Economic Forum, they recently announced their stakeholder capitalism metrics, which, as I said, have 21 groupings of standards that 120 companies have agreed to use in their disclosures. And we'll start to see the fruits of that in coming SK disclosures in the from the Securities and Exchange Commission here in the United States. And we'll also see these in corporate responsibility reports. Companies in the US like Best Buy, Merck, German company SAP are among a growing number of companies that are publishing corporate responsibility reports, which disclose their practices and measurable dashboards of performance on key issues. And so some of these key issues are elements that relate to compliance, not necessarily performance, right? But when we go through compliance, and these are recommendations from ISO standards, understand that compliance issues are often signals of underlying problems, like number and type of grievance filed, training hours on compliance and ethics, external dispute resolutions, number, type, and source of external audits, findings and actions that arise from these. These are more on the compliance side. Likewise, what are your total workforce costs? What does it cost you? What are the total costs? What are the external workforce costs if you're working through independent contractors? What's the ratio of basic salary and remuneration of each workforce category? Total costs of employment, cost per hire, recruitment costs, turnover costs. These are great costs to know, and many companies don't know them. And as a result of that, they make a lot of decisions with one eye on the road. They aren't seeing, they're making decisions that they think are smart, but they're not seeing the true hidden costs, like the cost of turnover, the cost of recruitment, the cost per hire. These are measures which, when you really look at, they can help you make much better decisions. But then there's some really interesting calculations that almost no companies use that can actually be tied to EBITDA performance, EBITDA being earnings before income tax, depreciation, and amortization. Human capital return on investment. This measures the profit generated per employee or full-time equivalent. And there's a formula, and it isn't that complicated, and it's here on this slide, so you can refer to it, but I'll read it. That's revenue, all your revenue, less all non-people costs, equipment, inventory, office, phones, etc., divided by all your human capital costs. That is, everything you spend on salaries, independent contractors, employee surveys, benefits, training, incentives, gifting, whatever, human resources. If you make that calculation, that will tell you your human capital return on investment. The human capital value add, that measures the profit an average employee contributes to the bottom line. And you can calculate this quarterly. And that would be revenue, all of your revenue minus total, all of the employee costs divided by the number of full-time equivalent employees or outside contractors. And these are numbers that you can compare quarter or year to year to give you a global sense of whether your investments in people are actually having an impact on the bottom line. And then, of course, there are a lot of other metrics that are very important that, again, are more important to actually manage to than necessarily disclose. And your disclosure strategies to public people is going to be different than your disclosure strategies internally. But part of having a human capital management practice, or I should say process, is to have clear dashboards, collect the data, and then use that data to make better decisions. Disclosures are useless unless they are managed to. And in fact, public disclosures are even dangerous if they're not managed to, because you're going to not like publishing information that looks like you're falling short. So a very big track element to be tracked today is diversity. Workforce diversity with respect to age, gender, nationality, disability, job, family type, sexual orientation. Diversity inclusion is really becoming the magical word today, because it's not just a matter of having diversity, but having strategies to make sure that we're fully engaging our diverse audience that helps us in a way attract new talent and new customers, new solution providers, and have better relationships with our community. Leadership trust, span of control, leadership development. Leadership trust, by the way, can be measured through employee surveys. Leadership development, percentage of leaders and talents who have formal mentors and coaches, percentage of leaders who have the formal function of mentors and coaches. And then we can get much more granular now, of course. We get into occupational health and safety, lost time for injury, number of accidents, number of people killed, gosh forbid, during work, training hours on health and safety at work versus total training hours, and number of employees who participate in this. Believe it or not, there are a number of companies who freely report this in their corporate responsibility reports. And then organizational culture, engagement, satisfaction, commitment, always, of course, measured by some type of survey or pulse survey. Retention rates, productivity, revenue turnover, profit per employee, and their willingness to refer. And you can run the same calculation for customers. And then again, I mentioned before, your human capital return on investment. And then there's some very key employee metrics that companies can be looking at. And a lot of these come from the ISO standards: your turnover rate, involuntary turnover rate, involuntary critical turnover rate. That's critical employees, frontline employees that are critical to your business. Voluntary, and then why are they leaving? Then looking at your capability building. What are your total costs? What's the percentage of people participating in it from year to year? What's that average employees, and what are they being trained in? What is the training effectiveness? Are we just doing rote compliance training, or are we training people on the skills that they need to deliver internal or external customer satisfaction, productivity, and qualityness in general, attitudinal willingness to refer? And the workforce competency rate. What abilities do we have for, what cross learning do we have for employees? And then succession planning, and that's at the high level, but that's at every level. What happens if Bill leaves the nursing station, or Jane leaves the doctor's position in our frontline emergency room? What is our plan to replace these people? Workforce availability, critical numbers, absentee rate, of course, full-time equivalents, number of employees. You'd be surprised how many companies don't even exactly know these numbers. You can't measure your ROI of employees if you don't know how many you have. Your contingent workforce, their status, what risks might be related to that. And again, that simple number: how many people do you employ on a full and part-time basis? And again, a sample scorecard could, of course, narrow down the information that you think is critical to your business. Not, again, the SEC rules are very clear. Organizations can report the information that's critical to their business. And there's a good reason for that, even though, the people that are into disclosures are very displeased with that generality, and there's for justifiable reason. But on the other hand, every company is different. Every company has different costs of turnover, business models, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to allow for that. But in a bigger company, you are going to be looking at the whole grievance issues. You're going to be looking at occupational health and safety issues and organizational culture issues. These are the key buckets of information that stakeholders and investors are really asking about today. And the kind of funny thing is that we do all of these surveys every single year, but the reality is very few companies ever do anything with that data. I dare say that employee surveys are probably the area where companies waste more money than on just about anything else, except for perhaps unmeasured incentive programs and recognition programs, because unless you do something with those surveys, and you actually have a system for applying them to your strategic goals, you're not going to get any benefit from them. So now I've spoken at the very strategic level of the types of measures, the types of dashboards that a company could develop to run its business by. And I'm now going to get a little bit more granular and talk about the master measurement model. And that's a system for actually measuring the ROI of almost any type of incentive recognition or performance improvement program. And before I do that, this session is going to talk, this next part of the session is going to talk about ROI. But the ROI of the section that I just went through with you, it provides the macro dashboard, the macro numbers, human capital ROI, human capital value add, productivity and quality and willingness to refer of key stakeholders, key diversity inclusion, key training issues, and any type of compliance issues that are indicative of risk and community dissatisfaction. Those are really critical macro issues, because then when you apply an ROI based approach to your performance improvement efforts, you can really correlate that against your macro efforts and see your macro dashboard. How are we moving the needle? So I'm going to be talking about the master measurement model, and that applies much more to very specific type of performance improvement efforts. Todd Hanson, to close out this class, he's going to focus more on how you can measure the ROI of almost any type of activity, if not on a financial basis, on a very systematic qualitative basis. So you can look forward to that change of face and a voice coming up shortly. So the master measurement model. This is a statistical process control developed by the American Productivity and Quality Center over 20 years ago for the International Research, Incentive Research Foundation. Sorry for that. And they are at theirf.org. And this study is a statistical process control that comes out of the quality management world that shows how you can use these same systems to measure the ROI of almost any type of incentive, recognition, loyalty, or performance improvement program in an organization. And ironically, it's rarely used. And I have no problem saying that, because companies don't measure the ROI of their programs. If you're listening to this program and you have the notion that most companies measure the ROI of the millions that many of them spend on different types of learning and incentive and recognition programs, you are mistaken. Consistent surveys show that at most, some companies measure people's satisfaction with them. But despite the efforts of the ROI Institute and Jack and Patty Phillips, who've done a terrific job promoting ROI, and they must have case studies because I believe they have thousands of practitioners. And Todd Hanson, as a matter of fact, he has also a practitioner of their program. But I myself rarely run into ROI-based programs, and I have opportunity to see a lot of programs. So the master measurement model is something that is actually easily applied. There's no reason not to apply it other than you don't care to measure ROI. And so since this program is for CFOs, I'm looking you all in the eye and saying that if your people are coming to you and they aren't bringing an ROI-based approach, I would recommend you send them back to the drawing board, because that which does not get measured rarely yields desired results. And the idea that something cannot be measured, it will be clearly refuted in this program. So the master measurement model, it is a process for building a return on investment into process design. And so and it's a strategic and systematic approach, which is the theme of almost everything that we do here at the Enterprise Engagement Alliance. And step one, it's to identify the people critical to achieving the goals. You can use a digital engagement platform, or it's an employee engagement app, or other types of ways to deploy and measure your program. But at the end of the day, you have to know who the people are, how you're going to communicate with them, how you're going to engage them, and that's the most important step. Then you have to set clear and realistic goals. If you're going to ask people to do something, has anyone ever done it before? Has that goal been accomplished? Is it a realistic goal to cut accidents by that much? or I should say to improve safety compliance that much, to improve sales that much, to improve market share, to improve cycle time, quality, wellness. Is it realistic that 10% of all employees can get their biomass into the right frame, into the right range? You really want to look at whether things are realistic and not set goals too high. And then it's always a good idea, no matter what your goal, what your program is, to involve key stakeholders in the process. And that's usually through a facilitated meeting by someone who's not viewed as a threat, someone who's trusted. It could be a professional facilitator. And their goal is to take people through, and it's a process called the nominal group technique, where you identify what is the goal we're trying to achieve, what are the best ways to get there, what are the behaviors that we need to do, what are the problems, and to gain a consensus around that. And there are other tools out there to help you gain a consensus in a systematic way. The next step is to develop 3 to 5 qualitative or quantitative measures, along with the means of tracking that information, and if possible, prioritize how important they are, or if relevant, prioritize how important they are in terms of what is their overall weight. And you want to use a mix of results measures, what you're trying to accomplish, along with process measures that measure whether people are doing it. And you can, apply the same thing to athletics. It's not just winning the race. It's not just the time of doing the track, but it's the measures of your stride, or other elements of your technique, which if perfected will yield that desired result. So this is a critical element to it. 3 is usually the right number. 5 is kind of a max, because it starts getting confusing. It's always a very good idea, even if it's a little bit arbitrary in this step, to assign a dollar value to that goal. What is it worth to achieve that goal in terms of financial benefits? And you know what? Almost anything can be tracked that way, because think about it. If you're asking people to do something and then you don't put a dollar value on it or some sort of quantitative value on it, it's very hard to wonder why you're asking them to do it in the first place. It's very easy to do that with sales. What's it worth to get a sale or an incremental sale? What's it worth to get a sales referral? But there are many compliance issues with them. There are many tracking issues with employees as well that are facilitated today by a lot of the tools like Basecamp and other processes that we use to manage practices, and which in fact are going to be used even more and more in this work at home environment. And that is cycle time. When did I start the project? When did I finish the project? What was the quality of the project? Those are type of things. Willingness to refer, that is generated by customers. There's all sorts of different ways. What is a lead worth? What is a referral worth? What is it worth to have a full year of complete safety compliance, where every time we did a safety check, everything was correct, et cetera, et cetera. In safety, you have to be very careful. You can't promote any type of activity, though, that would give people an incentive to cheat on reporting. So it's always important to focus on reporting, prevention. And then, of course, accidents do need to be tracked, but you want to promote the actions that will promote safety, and not promote the actions that will in any way affect reporting of those. And I made the terrible mistake of not turning off my cell phone, but hopefully that will not distribute. So always look for ways to improve performance, hidden cost savings, efficiencies, improvements. Going back, it's very important in step 6 to identify the potential obstacles, the tools needed to achieve the goal, and to develop a plan, and to really look at what could go wrong. Why might people fail? And you have to track things. Step 7, continually monitor results and feedback and make adjustments. And that's the advantage of having an employee engagement application. And you really, as I said, you want to track qualitative and quantitative goals. Numerical goals would be dollars or other performance metrics. Qualitative would be, again, those actions which you've done more of will yield the desired result. And you want to make sure that the data is objective and easy to collect. That's critical. If you have CRM systems, ERP systems, other types of systems, and you don't want to collect data for anything other than but for performance improvement efforts, just like in sports. There's not a player out there that doesn't value stats because those stats help them improve their results. So the measurement and those stats are critical for the process of continuous improvement. Uh, and Mourning our upcoming speaker, Todd Hanson, to be ready to join us, because at the end of the day, you have to be able to defend and justify and be accountable for any investment that your HR and marketing and salespeople bring to you. And you want to do it in a way where you get data where that program can be continuously improved. So I'm very pleased for multiple reasons to turn this over to Todd and make sure my phone doesn't ring again. And Todd is going to take us through an ROI of engagement process that he has mastered over the years that can be used in almost any type of HR, marketing, and sales application. So Todd, I'll join you back at the end. I'm going to let you take over from here.
Great.
I guess I'm going to share your slides. I'm going to stay on because we forgot to. Let's see if I can turn over and let you share those slides. Bear with us, folks. Todd, can you share the slides? Do you have permission?
I'll just ask you to advance when I need.
Okay, let's go. I'm going to be here with you. Todd, proceed.
Good day, everyone. I get to talk about a subject that I'm so passionate about, and that is measurement. All right, I'm not a big numbers person, but I do love what numbers can tell us for many, many reasons. And Bruce, if you wouldn't mind backing up one slide, I want to reinforce the why. Why do we go to the hassle of measuring results? All right, obviously, from those that are managing or allocating budgets, all right, we want to defend an existing budget. We want to justify a future budget and make sure that we're keeping things in context. Hey, are we going to be able to drive results, right? But I want to highlight this be accountable part, and that is the number one reason that people won't measure the results of any kind of investment in human capital is because of fear. And I just want to encourage people to face their fear. And I hope that I give you the confidence to do that, as well as the boldness to push into this area. And, you know, there's nothing more than a CEO will embrace than being accountable for spend that's allocated. But most importantly, and another thing really, the CEO and really entire organization, we believe will embrace is when you can drive continuous improvement that is fact-based. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit. Next slide. So there's something that needs to be accomplished with people. We go into this mode of design, right? What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And then we actually make it happen, fulfillment. And then to complete this cycle, it's measurement. And it really indeed is a cycle. That measurement insight allows us then with anything that's recurring to take what we've learned and apply it to the design again, so we can get bigger, better, faster, smarter. Next slide. So a little more about, let's land this plane a little bit. We're up in the ozone, perhaps, talking about concept and theory, but what do we measure? Like, how do we go about determining what we really need to know? This is from the ROI Institute, the ROI Methodology. It is indeed the gold standard for evaluation around the globe, right? And so there are 5 levels: reaction, learning, application, impact, business impact, and then ROI, return on investment. Next slide. A little more about what these levels are. So level 1 is reaction. It's for any investment in human capital and engagement type of investments. We want to understand the heads and hearts, how people are thinking and feeling about what it is that we're doing, how we're investing in them as an employee, a channel partner, things like that. So that's really critical, and I'll illustrate that in a second. But we also want to measure level 2, changes in knowledge, skills, information. And most importantly, with many things as it relates to human capital investment, there's this critical need to understand the nature of the program. How does it work? What's the desired behavior? So we measure that so that we understand if there are any gaps. And when we recognize gaps, we can fill those gaps. All right. It could be just simple promotion. It could be reinforcement from the top down, peer to peer, things like that. Level 3 is application. All right. We want to see what's happening in the workplace. What's the behavior, right? And then level 4 is impact. These are changes in business outcomes. Some of these outcomes can be monetized. Some can't. And those are important qualitative impacts in the business that we do want to attempt to measure and acknowledge that. But some of the changes in business outcomes we can monetize. When we can monetize, obviously, the impact that our investment has had and compare it to total cost, we can calculate ROI, right? So in many cases, organization will jump right to ROI. It's like, give me the reports, give me a calculator. And if you'll advance the slide there, Bruce. This head and heart part is critical, and we want to understand that, because what if you're not generating the ROI? Next slide. And we do know, if you continue to advance, that engagement is critical to our business performance. There's data. Here's a white paper from Enterprise Engagement Alliance. Critical stuff. We need to keep people engaged. Again, this is heads and hearts, how people think and feel. Next slide. And then the exclamation point on this is that we have this chain of impact, right? We can go ahead and calculate our ROI. It may be good, may not be so good. What are we going to do with that information? Next slide. So we have this chain of impact. When we have people's heads and hearts engaged in any kind of investment we're making, and they have a great, clear understanding of what we're trying to teach, the tools we're trying to provide, the behavior we're looking for, that's critical. It leads to application implementation as behavior in the workforce. And then generates level 4, the business impact, and now we can calculate ROI in a credible manner. Next slide. So that's, again, fairly conceptual, but let's now drill down to actually how do we go about this, right? So this is a simple tool that breaks out our objectives in these 5 levels. What are we shooting for? Bruce had referred to this in the master measurement model. So when you align these two together, all right, now we're going to translate this into getting something done in our business. So we got our objectives outlined. And so there's the measures. It's a what, and the data collection method or instruments. Sometimes a report, sometimes it could be a questionnaire. There's other sources of data. So that's the where, the data sources. I mentioned that, and then the timing. So when, and then who owns that. There may be other parties within the organization that can provide us the ability to go out and gather information to understand whether we're hitting these objectives in these 5 areas. Next slide. So we aren't going to leave here today with a complete understanding of exactly how to do things, but there is a nice linear step-by-step methodology. It's available. You can find a lot of resources at roiinstitute.net. Reach me through Bruce Bolger. I'll be happy to give you complimentary advice, guidance, direction, but there is a nice systematic way in which to do this that will allow you to succeed in measuring investments in human capital. I will make a little note here, especially for those that are really financially sharp, is that the methodology also prescribes isolation techniques. In other words, we've done this, we know that it contributed this to ROI, but can we isolate the impact of this particular initiative? This most simple example there or illustration is a sales incentive, right? So there's a lot of things that go on in the marketplace. We launched a sales incentive to drive performance, could be an employee recognition program, et cetera. But there are several isolation techniques that allow us to create real credibility when we calculate ROI. So allows any kind of ROI calculation to pass the sniff test. Next slide. So what are we going to do with all this information? We've come up with a plan. We've gathered the information. We've got the data. Now let's really, truly make it actionable, be able to present it to our peers, leadership, etc. And so an impact report is simply a summary of these results. So first part is key findings, all right? It's the elevator pitch in a minute or less. What happened in this particular investment, this initiative, this program? What happened that the data told us? And then we identify barriers and enablers. Quite simply, what worked, what didn't work. All right, the enablers, great. These things really worked. It drove the right performance, drove the right business results. But most importantly, we do want to make sure we have a great, clear understanding of the barriers, because that is going to fuel our ability to develop an action plan that we're able then to take what we've learned, apply it in the future to other programs. In this program, if it's recurring, then great. We indeed drive continuous improvement that is fact-based. So hopefully that's given you a great insight and just a little more to share with you to dream a little bit about how we can use measurement and evaluation to add this seriousness, this discipline, a systematic way in which to do this. And next slide, Bruce. We can all get awfully confused with data, right? I hope I've shared with you a way to translate data into something that's really meaningful with a key findings, barriers, enablers, and an action plan. And instead of throwing up your hands and go right to the cocktail reception as this shares. Next slide, Bruce. Companies that are really pushing into this to create this accountability, assure that they're embracing the whole concept of continuous improvement. And of course, it provides them ability to defend and justify budgets moving forward, is a dashboard. In this case, it's an illustration of all the training and leadership and development investment in an employee base. And we have put on a dashboard now 3 metrics here that we combine. And this is available and presented on a quarterly basis to a leadership team. And for those that are really responsible for training and development in this situation, can understand trends. When there's downward trends or upward trends, an opportunity to identify what's causing a downward trend in one of these 3 key metrics. If it's upward trends, we know that what we're doing is working. So that gives you hopefully a little something to dream about, to actually take this into a dashboard that can be shared, can allow you to put your finger on the pulse. Very much when you're jumping into your car, you really want to pay attention to those, your dashboard components and any of the red lights that go off. So Bruce, next slide. I'll let you take it from here, Bruce.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being able to hear.
Well, thank you very much, Todd. And if you look at that last slide, in fact, I'm just going to go right back to that for a moment. This ties back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the session, Todd, having effective dashboards. And, you know, people say that, you know, we can't have people dashboards. Yes, we can have people dashboards. And, you know, there's a lot of people in HR who hate the term human capital. You know, people aren't capital. Well, guess what? They are capital. And if they're not valued as capital, they get treated as such. And we've tried the terminology over the last 20 years of warm and fuzzies, and it hasn't worked. What does work is when we convince businesses that when they invest strategically in people, they're going to get a better result. And as an interesting concluding a statistic for our CFO audience, there's a stock fund known as, it's an ETF, an exchange traded fund known as the Just Capital Fund, JUST ticker. It is up 13% in the 2 years since it was launched over the Dow Jones Industrial Average, 13% over the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Now, there's another terrific ETF if you believe in share buybacks. That's a TTAC fund, and they focus on companies that make money by doing share buybacks. And do you know that that fund has not outperformed the Dow Jones? It has performed at 19% versus 18.9%. So there's a lot of evidence that companies that make a strategic and systematic approach in people are going to outperform others. But as Todd is pointing out, and as I did in the earlier part of this session, it doesn't help to throw money at people. It doesn't help to just have a bright, shiny object or to have a lunch, set up a new lunchroom for the folks. It's got to be part of a strategic and systematic approach. And yes, every type of activity can have a dashboard, and no one should be scared of it any more than an athlete would be scared of having a dashboard of their performance. So Todd, thanks a lot for helping out with this session. They'll stay tuned, folks, for the other parts of our course program that are available on demand as part of your membership. Thanks again. Thanks again,
Thank you,
Todd.
Bruce. It was a pleasure.